to a very special and exciting episode of the Illusion of Consensus podcast with myself, Rav Arora, independent journalist based in Vancouver. Today I have the great honor and privilege to speak with Rick Doblin from MAPS, the Multidisciplinary Association of Psychedelic Science.
Sorry. Rob. So it's Multidisciplinary Association for Psychedelic Studies.
Psychedelic Studies. Okay. Great way to intro the podcast. Okay. Okay. So Rick, for those people who don't know, has been on the front lines for the past several decades working on getting psychedelics approved for therapeutic purposes, and particularly MDMA. And we're going to talk about the different psychedelics and why Rick has been focused on MDMA. But Rick has done incredible work on this front for years, and there have been a number of compelling studies on MDMA-assisted psychotherapy for PTSD, and most recently a phase 3 study, which showed astounding efficacy. And I'm going to ask Rick all about that. Rick, thanks for coming on, and looking forward to chatting about a lot of different topics.
Yeah, thank you for having me. As you alluded to, we are getting a lot of the critical data that the FDA has required, also Health Canada and other regulatory agencies around the world. But I think what we most need now is telling stories, is to have people understand really what we're doing and why and how it might fit in. So I really appreciate this opportunity to speak with you and, share the stories, because that'll really give people a deeper understanding than just looking at the data.
So let's start with a little bit of basics for some people who may not be familiar with this field. So why have you chosen MDMA as the compound to advance further in the research and therapeutic realm first? And what is it about MDMA that is particularly compelling to you? And why has that been your focus to get approved for therapeutic purpose over other psychedelics?
Yeah, well, we have to do rigorous science to move through regulatory agencies, but we don't actually do just plain science. We do political science. And what I mean by that is that we have to have all sorts of political considerations into why we're doing what we're doing. And so to go back a little bit, I've been sort of at this for 51 years, since 1972, when I decided when I was 18 to focus my life on psychedelics. But that was right after the backlash against LSD. And I had learned about the value of LSD and had a general sense that as individuals, myself, and also as a species, we were way overdeveloped intellectually and way underdeveloped emotionally and spiritually. And as a consequence, we're heading towards disaster. Albert Einstein said the splitting of the atom has changed everything except for our mode of thinking, and hence we drift towards unparalleled catastrophe. What shall be required of mankind is to survive as a whole new mode of thinking. And so I thought that mode of thinking that he's talking about is how we're all connected, and that if we can realize we're all one family of life on this planet, then we'll find ways to negotiate our differences better and appreciate differences. But so I sort of learned about that right after the backlash. And I had a lot of psychedelic experiences with LSD, with mescaline, but it took me a lot of time to integrate them. And so basically I dropped out of college as a freshman in the middle of my freshman year and spent 10 years getting grounded in different ways, building houses, getting into the physical world. And then finally at age 28, I was ready to go back to school to become a psychedelic therapist. And my first semester, now this is September of 1982, was at a college called New College of Florida. It's the college I had went to from 71 and 72 and dropped out. And it is the Honors College of the state of Florida, and it permitted off-campus study. And what I decided to do was to do the first semester, a big part of it at Esalen in Big Sur, California, with a month-long workshop with Stan Groff and Christina Groff, his wife. And that's where I learned about MDMA. So when I learned about MDMA, I learned two things. I learned that it had been a therapy drug since the middle to late 70s under the name Adam, and that it had been successfully done in hundreds of thousands of doses, had been used in these therapeutic settings, but that it had sort of leaked out of these settings, and it was starting to be called ecstasy and used as a party drug. And this was during the time of Nancy Reagan and Ronald Reagan and escalation of the drug war and Just Say No. So it was clear to the people that I was meeting that were part of this psychedelic community that the MDMA was doomed. It was going to eventually be criminalized. And so I thought, okay, I learned about LSD after the backlash. Now I'm learning about MDMA before the backlash. And now I can get involved to try to protect the therapeutic use of it. And I started a nonprofit before MAPS connected to Buckminster Fuller. And we gathered resources together, and we did introduce MDMA to a whole bunch of different people that could later become witnesses in a legal case against the DEA, people at Harvard Medical School, psychiatrists, mystics, all different kinds of people. And then in the summer of '84, the DEA moved to criminalize MDMA. And we were prepared that they were only after ecstasy. They had no knowledge of the therapeutic use. And so it was, we took them by surprise. And around the 30-day public comment period near the final days, I went into DEA and had a whole list of advocates and therapists, psychiatrists, and how we demanded a hearing. And we managed to get this hearing. And during the course of the hearing, we were winning in the court of public opinion. We had various monks, rabbis, not your normal raver, the way people might think who's using ecstasy. And then, various esteemed psychiatrists and psychotherapists. And we were winning. And the DEA freaked out because we were winning in the court of public opinion, and they emergency scheduled MDMA in the summer of '85 while the hearings were still going on. The hearings continued, and we won. The DEA administrative law judge said MDMA should be illegal for recreational use, like ecstasy, but it should be legal for therapeutic use. And the DEA ignored that recommendation, came up with some bogus explanation. We sued twice in the appeals courts, won both times. Eventually, the FDA figured out how to satisfy the courts, and MDMA was criminalized. So in '86, I started MAPS. And the goal was to bring back psychedelic medicine. So now, and work through the FDA. So why MDMA? MDMA is the most gentle of all the psychedelics. It has this effect of reducing fear. It impacts the amygdala, the part of our brain that processes fear.
It does a great job of that, doesn't it? Reducing the fear. Whereas the other psychedelics, they can really amp up fear in a really powerful way. MDMA, as far as I can tell, can't do that. It does the opposite in a very reliable way.
Well, that's mostly true. Although there are people that take MDMA in either romantic contexts or party contexts, and they're just looking to have a good time. And MDMA, in a sense, by reducing fear of difficult emotions, emotions and memories can come to the surface that can be difficult. And if people are not in the right context, if they try to stuff those emotions and memories down, they could end up being worse off, and they can become quite scared. So actually, to just give you this example, 1984 is when I worked with the first PTSD patient. And I spoke about this in my TED Talk. So if anybody wants to check that out. But this was when MDMA was still legal, and I had sold some actually to a friend of mine, and he had done some with a girlfriend of his. And during that experience, a memory of past rape and violent assault came to her. And she had previously been in and out of institutions. She'd been PTSD, depressed about that, been medicated at different times. And so this emotion that she had not expected came to the surface, and it so frightened and destabilized her that she checked herself into a mental institution to not kill herself. And while she was there, they stabilized her and they gave her a bunch of meds. And then when she left, she was even more suicidal than before because these meds had not really helped before. And so that's where my friend contacted me and said, could you talk to her? And I'm like, hey, I'm not qualified. She's suicidal, but I agreed to talk to her. And during this conversation, I said, if you promise not to commit suicide while we work together, I would be glad to work with you. I just came back again from Esalen, learning about helping people through what Stan was calling psychedelic spiritual emergencies or spiritual emergence, when people break down. And that's often pathologized, but it can be for a good process sometimes. So I did work with her, and as it turned out, we did the first session MDMA, the second an LSD MDMA session, and it worked wonders. And she got a lot better. And over time, she became a therapist to help others, and now she's one of our lead therapists. And
really?
So since
Who's that?
1984, her name is Marcella Otalora, and I do talk about her in the TED Talk. And we were just together in Iceland.
Sorry, what's her last name? Let me just get this down.
Yeah, Otalora, Otalora. And so this is just to say that MDMA, that's where I knew that MDMA was great for PTSD, but I also knew that it can be disruptive for people. So it's not always that you take MDMA, the fear goes away. So when MDMA was criminalized, then I had to figure out what is the best psychedelic to try to open the door to psychedelic research again and psychedelic medicine. And also, what is the best clinical indication? So we need to come up with a pair of the drug and what it's for. And so I looked at all the different psychedelic drugs, and actually the first ever use of a psychedelic for treating PTSD was a Dutch doctor, Dr. Bastiaans, in 1961. He started doing work with LSD for what he called concentration camp syndrome. So these were people that had been in the Nazi concentration camps. Some of them were Dutch resistance fighters as well, and some of them survived the war and later became part of the Dutch government and helped protect him. But there's an incredible book called Shaviti, Shivitti, by an Israeli Holocaust survivor who's a writer who did LSD therapy with Dr. Bastiaans. And so this book is really incredible for people that are interested in therapy. But the LSD brings things to the surface that people have not been able.
For myself and for listeners who want to look this up, what's the spelling of that book?
Shivitti. It's Shaviti, a vision. It's very powerful, and it's about very difficult LSD experiences. But the LSD doesn't reduce the fear. And my Israeli relatives actually knew the fellow who wrote the book, and they said it helped him a lot. But there was still work that was so painful. It was hard for him to fully do. So what I realized is that.
Sorry, was it successful with the LSD? Was he able to recover from? Okay.
Yeah, it was successful. It helped a lot. It wasn't as full as it could have been, but it helped a lot.
Okay, gotcha.
But there isn't that fundamental fear reduction. That's where people can get stuck.
Right, because LSD can put you in a very foreign place where all these colors and visions, and it's suddenly like you're in a very different space. So if you don't have that grounding, that base layer of safety, suddenly you're like, oh shit, I'm seeing things I've never seen before. And oh my God, my face is melting when I look in the mirror. That can amp up the fear, right? For someone who's going through a lot of PTSD.
Yeah, very, very much so. Now, that's where the importance of being in a safe place with supportive therapists, because LSD can be an incredible tool of healing, of spiritual inspiration, but it's the context in which you take it that makes the most difference. LSD, the psychedelics in general, are just tools, and how we use them will determine the outcomes. So I felt that of all the classic psychedelics, the LSD, the psilocybin, ayahuasca, peyote, all these psychedelics have this effect also of dissolving your sense of self.
Yeah.
They call it the default mode network, sort of our resting state of how we're, just gathering information according to what our various hierarchy of needs are. And so there's this also challenge of, as your sense of self is dissolving, your defenses are also dissolving. So things can come to the surface, which is good, but it's more challenging for people. So I felt that the MDMA had kind of revitalized the underground psychedelic therapy movement. Even though it was legal, it was kept quiet for fear that once it would become known, it would be criminalized. And that's actually what happened as well. Mm-hmm. So of the psychedelics, MDMA being the most gentle, it's the easiest for people to work with. It gives feelings of love, feelings of connection.
Self-compassion is a big one.
Self-compassion. And there's another big part of this, which is this idea of how do we bring psychedelic therapy up from the underground? We all believe, I mean, the therapists, the advocates believe that the therapists who work with patients with psychedelics will be more effective if they've done them themselves. Now, you wouldn't go to a yoga teacher that's never done yoga or a meditation teacher that doesn't meditate. At the same time, psychiatrists will say, oh, we'd give electroconvulsive therapy to our patients for depression, but we don't need to give ECT to ourselves. Or we give patients antipsychotic drugs. We don't need to take them ourselves. And all of that is true. And it's because the ECT or the antipsychotics, that's the treatment. But in our case, with MDMA-assisted therapy or psychedelic-assisted therapy, the therapy is the treatment. The relationship with the therapist, the therapeutic alliance, is the key factor for whether people get better or not. It's not the school of psychotherapy. So part of bringing a psychedelic into mainstream practice is this view that therapists should have their own experiences with that substance. And so I knew that if we tried to bring back LSD or psilocybin first, that there's more fear in psychiatrists and psychotherapists for them trying LSD or psilocybin themselves than there would be for MDMA. So I felt that MDMA could really, by being the most gentle, the easiest in a sense to work with, even though when you work with severe PTSD, it's not easy at all.
Right.
But all of that made me think, okay.
So is that the primary rationale then for why you were interested in MDMA first, that it's the most gentlest one?
But yet it's profound. It's gentle, yet profound.
Yeah, of course.
And, the story to tell to therapists is that they should try it themselves to be better therapists, would encounter less resistance. But that was only part of the puzzle. So, if we're choosing MDMA, there has to be, what is the clinical condition that we're studying?
Right. So before we get into that, you didn't start with PTSD first? Like, I want to cure PTSD. You started with MDMA and then went to PTSD? Yes. Is that, gotcha. Okay.
Exactly. Yeah. So I started with, LSD and psilocybin were the main drugs used in the 60s. Then it was wiped out for, multiple decades. And even when MDMA then sort of came, it wasn't illegal. Then it was illegal. And so I felt that, it would be easier to bring MDMA forward than the other psychedelics. Some people even say, MDMA is not a psychedelic. It's an empathogen, or doesn't act in the classic psychedelic way, which is true. But the word psychedelic means mind manifesting, to bring forth, to manifest. So LSD does that. MDMA does that.
I was going to bring that up. Yeah. Obviously, MDMA would be very different than the others in that it almost never, aside from some anomalies, produces any grandiose, phantasmagorical, visionary experience. It's more about the feeling rather than anything visionary.
Well, in a sense, that's true in terms of the visuals. When your eyes are open, you're there. Sometimes there's called nystagmus, which is a wiggling of the eyes that makes things a little bit blurry, but you're basically seeing what's there. It doesn't impact your vision. But in a therapy setting, we have an 8-hour therapy session, and around half the time people are listening to music on headphones and they have eye shades on. And so when they're going through this inner experience, it's like a dream. People have all sorts of images, but they're not thinking, they're not, quote, hallucinations, or they're seeing with the mind's eye, and they're seeing in a metaphorical, poetic, visionary manner as they imagine so just as one example, there was one of the veterans that was in our study that had this idea that the warrior self that he had brought back from Iraq, he had locked up in a cage inside himself. And so he had this vision of this kind of demonic little warrior self with these evil red eyes that was locked in a cage, a gorilla kind of a thing, and then through this MDMA process, he realized that this was a part of him, and that actually this part of him had tried to keep him alive when he was in Iraq, and that he just didn't trust it because of what he saw it do in Iraq, but he kept it in a cage. And he was moving through the bars and stabbing him in the side, this warrior self of him. And he realized he's got to make friends with this person, this part of him. So he pulls the knife out from the side, he opens the cage, and then the evil eyes sort of disappear, they embrace, and he realizes they can go forward together. So all this to say is that there's a lot of inner imagery and inner storytelling that people are doing about their own history or their own, they personify emotional conflicts or things. So it's fundamentally different from the classic psychedelics in that it's not eyes open, a lot of visuals, but it is metaphorical and poetic in that way. All right. So then MDMA was the start. Okay. Let's say MDMA, then what it's for. So the first thing is that these
I also want to get into safety as well, whether you want to do that now or if you want to do that right after.
Sort of okay. Well, we can do that now.
Safety concerns, neurotoxicity, and secondly, I have heard of people talk about experiencing bladder issues after MDMA, and whether that is suggestive of some kind of potential damage or some kind of harm short term.
It's not so much. It's sort of UTIs, I think, urinary tract infections. So it doesn't. There's more bladder issues with ketamine. That's where the big concern is. So that people sometimes get urinary tract infections or something. But we've done all sorts of animal studies and all sorts of toxicity studies. There's no harm to the bladder.
A lot of people report, I've heard, like urinating very slowly afterwards during the experience and for some days after. Do you know what the causal mechanism is for that?
Well, I don't actually, but I do know that sometimes when I have to pee on MDMA, it feels like when you normally have to pee, you just think about it and then it happens. But under MDMA, it seems like there's this time lag. You kind of have to will yourself, I'm going to pee. And then this intention takes a while to go through your system before you actually do.
And the days after, people report the days after, like 2-3 days, it's just a bit slower, a bit more of a difficult process, and then it gets better within a few days. I've heard a lot of reporting on that. Have you?
Not that much. No, not that during for sure, but not that much for the days after. But yeah, there's what people do often report, and what I feel myself personally is that in the days after, your normal patterns of response are sort of slowed down. There's a fraction of a second lag before you respond, and that way you can just have things sink a little bit deeper and to go in a way that's fuller and deeper. And so it's really an opportunity to be out of your normal patterns and to think in a deeper way. But I would say of the safety issues, when you think about LSD or psilocybin, those drugs, you can take massive amounts of them and you're not going to hurt yourself. So the psychological challenges of LSD and psilocybin are the most significant. It's not the physiological challenges. It's more the psychological, how you react to the classic psychedelics. With MDMA, it's different. And people may have heard about how people at raves, can dance all night under the influence of MDMA, and then they can overheat and you can die from hyperthermia. Sometimes people have thought, so the solution to hyperthermia is I'm just going to drink a lot of water to cool myself down, and then people can drink too much water and they can die from what's called hyponatremia. MDMA does increase the blood pressure a bit. So I would say that the psychological safety of MDMA is greater than the psychological safety of the classic psychedelics, but the physiological challenges in these rave contexts are more significant. However,
we're not talking about raves. We're talking about therapeutic, and I'm also curious which dose you're giving in your therapeutic experiences.
But in a therapeutic setting with MDMA, we don't see any of these. Nobody ever gets hyperthermia. Nobody gets hyponatremia. We screen people for, healthy hearts. So in general, the MDMA is safer psychologically and riskier physiologically than the classic psychedelics, which are riskier psychologically and safer physiologically. All right. But in terms of the doses that we use, we basically use similar doses to people would take at a party. So the way then we'll get into why I chose PTSD, but just to say that our treatment approach is 42 hours of therapy, and it's 3 MDMA sessions, roughly 1 month apart. And they're 8 hours long with 2 therapists, often a male, female, but not always. And then there are 12 90-minute non-drug psychotherapy sessions as well. Again, this is really a psychotherapeutic intervention.
Sorry, you also said 42. What was the 42 number for?
42 hours total of therapy.
Okay, hour. Okay, gotcha.
And
is it psychotherapy, is that every week, once a week, or?
Pretty much once a week. There's 3 of these 90-minute sessions for preparation and to build the therapeutic alliance before the first MDMA session. And those are more or less once a week. Then there's 3 of these 90-minute integrative sessions after each MDMA session, including the very next day, and then the next week or two, then another week or two. And then the MDMA sessions themselves are 3 to 5 weeks apart, but basically 1 month apart.
Yeah, which is somewhat frequent, but I guess you guys are doing a good job making sure that these people are not just having an experience and going to work the next day, but actively working on whatever traumas have been coming up and integrating them in their lives.
Yes. And also, again, about this idea that sometimes people say they feel tired or something after MDMA. So we really try to tell people it's a 2-day experience. The first day is to have the experience. Again, it's an 8-hour session. And then in many of the places, we have people spend the night at the treatment center so that they can continue to integrate, think about it, not get distracted by traffic or going home. And then the therapy the next day takes place also where the treatment took place. And so it's more convenient if they're there. It's not going to be required. But this idea is that you rest the next day, you have no appointments. And people have often heard about suicide Tuesdays or low mood after MDMA, but we do not see that in the research setting anymore. There's no more low mood in the MDMA group than in the placebo group that didn't get MDMA at all. Because I think the big differences are we do it during the day. When people do this at night, we end up doing it at 10 in the morning. So people do it at night, they don't sleep. They're not mixing it with alcohol. They're not mixing it with anything else. They're able to get often can get a night's sleep after the MDMA session. It's pure MDMA. So we don't see those low moods. So of this 3 MDMA sessions, though,
that is common though. Like the low mood. Like I personally experienced it after doing like a day session, 11 a.m. to whatever 4 or 5 p.m. The next day is always kind of a wreck emotionally. You're crying quite a bit. You're very emotional, on edge. Both of the times that I've done it, that's been the case.
Okay. I think a lot of people don't feel that. I think a lot of it depends on what issues you're working on during the day of the MDMA. So that for me, I often like the next day even better than the MDMA day. Because it's, I'm slowed down, I'm quiet, I'm more in my normal way, but I can see that I've learned something. Something is carried over. So this idea of the second day as rest is very important. But we just don't see in quite a few patients, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of patients, this idea of low mood due to MDMA, or people would say, oh, it's due to serotonin depletion or something like that. So when you really think of the next day as rest, I'm kind of curious when you've done it in that way with the low mood. If you do it on a Sunday or something, then you have to go to work on a Monday. Or if you do it, if you have time to rest,
you usually have nothing the next day, and it's kind of a sad day.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Well, So sometimes, can you say why that is? What do you think that's from?
Well, the conventional explanation has been the serotonin depletion, which is why they recommend taking the 5-HTP supplement, which can help with that. Is that not universally true?
Well,
that your serotonin supply is totally depleted, so that feel good chemical that makes you feel happy and stable, you have less of that the next day?
I don't think that's universally true. And so back in 1992, when we got the first permission from FDA finally to do work with the first MDMA study with a phase 1 dose response safety study, we said people are using 5-HTP afterwards, and some people say it helps them. And the FDA said, we don't want you to do anything at all based on assumptions that have come from research that didn't happen inside an FDA protocol. So let's just give MDMA and see what happens. And if you have a bunch of people with this low mood, then you could start thinking, oh, now we're combining it with 5-HTP. So our very first study began with MDMA without any supplements. And from the very first study, we never saw the need for it in the context that we were doing it. So we don't use supplements, but I do believe that people report using 5-HTP and often do find it helpful. But anyway, we don't see it. So the first session is with 80 milligrams. And what we do is we give half the
80. Okay.
Yeah.
So
it's pretty low.
Yeah, it's a lower dose. I was going to say for my sessions, it's always been 120 or 130 with an optional booster, which I think I've taken. I think 40 or 50 milligrams, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes. So we do use the optional booster of half the initial amount. And that's right around 2 hours. It can be an hour and a half to 2.5 hours, but sometime within that, we administer this supplemental dose. And the goal is precisely to make it a longer session. And the reason that we did this is one of our early studies was with veterans, firefighters, and police officers.
Hi, everyone. A quick word from our first and exciting sponsor, Alchemy Elements. Alchemy Elements is a powerful adaptogenic supplement. For those of you who don't know, adaptogens are a class of plant compounds, primarily herbs and mushrooms, which can help build the mind and body's resistance to stress. Alchemy Elements contains a very unique and carefully selected blend of 9 adaptogens, such as lion's mane, cordyceps, polygalaroot, and shilajit, and they can help boost energy, boost your immunity, and increase focus and overall stabilize your mood. It can have a wide array of effects, which can often depend from individual to individual, but it's a great way to start your morning and generally increase your focus and your energy levels. You can just pour 1 scoop of Alchemy Elements into your morning coffee or your protein shake or smoothie, and you're off to the races. It's a great way to start the day. I use it every day. I find that it can generally stabilize my mood levels and increase focus, especially if I want to get a big project done or finish a very important task. Alchemy Elements often is a great way to kind of start and get my focus going and get me primed for whatever task I want to accomplish. We're very excited and very happy to work with Alchemy Elements. We've been working with them for a couple of months, and now in this new iteration of the podcast, we're going to continue our relationship, which is very special to us because Alchemy aligns with our mission and values of individuals taking greater ownership of their personal mental and physical health and relying less and less on corrupt and flawed, generalized kind of medical advice, and less reliance on pharmaceutical drugs, and more of general interest and focus on holistic health. For a limited time, Illusion of Consensus readers and listeners can get 10% off their first order using the code word Illusion, or 30% off a subscription monthly order, where you can get a monthly shipment of Alchemy Elements delivered to you. For the subscription orders, you can also get with it a bonus gold kit to store your Alchemy Elements. Overall, I think Alchemy is a fantastic product. I highly recommend you check them out in the link below in this podcast, wherever you're listening, Spotify, Apple, Substack, Rumble, or YouTube. Just go to the link, use the code word Illusion, and you can get your discount and you won't regret it.
And we had inactive placebo, 30 milligrams, and or no, excuse me, we had 30 milligrams, 75 milligrams, and 125 milligrams. And personally, I don't particularly like the 75 or 80 milligram dose range. I do like the 120, 125, something like that. But to our surprise, in a therapeutic setting, the people that got the 75 milligrams did really great in this particular study. And so that led us to think that it's a more gentle introduction to people that are deeply, deeply traumatized and have constantly for a long time, felt overwhelmed by their painful emotions and memories. So the first session is 80 milligrams, followed by 40. And then there's an option for the second session to either stay at that 80 milligrams with the 40 milligram supplemental, or to go up to 120 milligrams, followed 2 hours later by 60 milligrams. And over 90% of the people take that option to go higher. And then
for the second experience?
For the second one, yeah. And then the third one, which is, again, it's an option to stay at this higher dose or to use the lower dose. And again, more or less 90% of the people stick with this 120 over 60. So that's our dosing.
120, and then 2 hours later you can take 60 more.
Yeah. And just to say, there's been some really interesting research by Rick Doblin at Hopkins on what's called neuroplasticity, the ability of the brain to be more active in structuring itself, more plastic, more able to make newer connections. It's in a sense connected to the integration process. And so what Gula has shown is that the longer you are in the psychedelic state, and she's compared LSD, psilocybin, MDMA, ibogaine, ketamine, the longer you're in the psychedelic state, the longer the period lasts, and it can last for weeks and weeks, where this neuroplasticity is still prevalent.
Yeah.
Right? So that's kind of a...
Yeah, I want to also close the loop on the safety thing. So with safety, you're saying there's no direct link, or at least known link, between MDMA and, say, bladder issues or urinary issues? There's nothing to be concerned there, not, really? Okay.
We do a pretty good job of collecting reported side effects. I would say we do a great job of that. Okay. And so people do not report, now keep in mind, we're only giving MDMA a few times.
Yeah.
So it's really a different situation than if somebody does, every weekend for 2 years or whatever, and then takes a dose and then takes another dose and then takes another dose. So, but in our context, we do not see bladder issues.
Okay. Is there any, sorry, you can go on in a second, but I was going to ask, is there any also longer term data, like people who do MDMA, 4 times a year? Like, is there like an ideal amount that you can do versus what's kind of the threshold for a good amount versus too much, which could cause issues? Like if someone's doing MDMA 7 or 8 times a year or 10 times a year versus 3 times a year, is there any kind of indication if there might be a too much zone?
Well, I think that what we see is that when we do this like 1 month apart, there seems to be no diminishing of the effect. Mm-hmm. And there's no identifiable substantial serious adverse events or health issues from that use. I think one of the things that people talk about, many people who talk about MDMA, is that unlike cannabis, unlike LSD, unlike psilocybin, people report that the effects of MDMA somewhat diminish over time after they've done it a certain amount of times. It's different for everybody. For me, it didn't start happening till I'd done it around 50 times. It always felt like very much like the first time.
You've done MDMA in that range? So you've done it 50 or more?
I've done it over 100 times.
Yeah. Oh, really? Wow.
Yeah.
So you're not particularly concerned with safety or anything? It seems to be pretty safe at that amount over a span of several years, I imagine.
Well, that was keep in mind, that's since 1982.
Yeah, exactly.
So right now that's 41 years. But I've probably done it 125 times, something like that. And I don't have bladder issues. I don't have, I don't feel any way that it's hurt me. I feel that it's decreased stress and tension. It's helped me be more loving. It's, on balance, it's been, a gift to my life, you could say. But there is this diminishing of an effect. And so it's still worth it, but it's not quite as remarkable as first. Now, I do have friends back in the 80s that when we were first discovering MDMA would, some of them, very few, would take it every weekend. And what I noticed is that they started getting the opposite of what they were looking for. They were looking for a deeper therapeutic experience. They were looking for more love, but the more they took it, the more they got kind of emotionally wrung out. And they ended up being more flat emotionally because they weren't doing the integration work. They were just doing it for the experience over and over and over. And in some ways running away from certain kind of feelings. And so I think that it's possible to do it too much to the point where you're getting the opposite effect. Because one of the good things about MDMA from a drug abuse liability perspective is that the normal kind of drug that you get addicted to is a drug that you get a tolerance to after you take it, and then you just take higher doses. And then you keep taking higher doses. That's why sometimes people with cocaine or opiates,
for listeners, just
can end up taking enormous doses that don't affect them as much because they've developed this tolerance. And then trying to get off of it is a big problem. But with MDMA, when you try to take higher and higher doses, you get more of the speedy effects. You don't get more of the heart opening effects. So that's why we don't see people who have, decade-long problem of overdoing MDMA or even multi-years. Some people will do it for a year or more, but it almost always is.
Okay, you're back. I just lost you the last 60 seconds. You were frozen.
Oh, sorry. Oh, yeah, I said that.
Now you're back.
Okay, people don't have these lifelong patterns of use of MDMA. Sometimes they may use it too much for a year or so, but then they get the opposite effects, and then they don't get more what they want by increasing the dosage, and then they'll taper off or stop and recognize it's not helping. So I think that there is this self-protective mechanism built into the molecule that we don't understand why, but it is a protection against long-term abuse. And it has taken some people 6 months to a year to sort of recover their normal emotional functioning after they've overdone it on MDMA by doing it way, way too frequent. But I don't think that using it a couple times a year or using it, once a month for a long time, or, I think those kind of patterns, we don't see a lot of evidence that that's problematic. And we're not doing that in research. In therapy, we're only giving it a few times encased in psychotherapy with the goal of helping people get to the root problem and work through that and learn that they don't need to be overwhelmed, experience and let out all the trauma that they had to sort of guard against when the trauma was happening. So because they focus on survival. And we see that there is, really good risk benefit ratio as far as we see. All right. So to sort of round back to what we were talking about before is about why PTSD. All right. So we have MDMA. So then the political strategy is we need a patient population that is respected by the American population in general. So psychedelics are great in many contexts for treatment of alcoholism, substance abuse disorders. But in general, people with substance abuse disorders are the other. We sort of disown them. They're not held in high regard in a sense. So we needed a patient population that was held in high regard. We also wanted desperately to find a way to have bipartisan support to take it out of the culture wars. And so PTSD in veterans, we also needed a disease that could lead to suicide, that had very serious consequences if it wasn't treated. And we needed a disease that many of the available therapies and pharmacotherapies, psychotherapies and pharmacotherapies, they did work for a significant minority of the people, or even a significant majority, but that they left many people still needing more therapy or more treatments, that there was an unmet medical need. So we needed a very expensive unmet medical need in people that were highly regarded by society. And when we looked around and thought MDMA, can be great for PTSD in a therapeutic context, and that this combination then of MDMA for PTSD is what I settled on strategically. Now, that was at a time when it was mostly Vietnam veterans who were still struggling, but also, and this is kind of a sad part about our culture, there's around 13 million PTSD patients in America. And the ones that there's more than a million veterans are on disability at the VA because of PTSD. And the VA spends somewhere in the neighborhood of $17 billion a year just in disability payments to these over a million PTSD sufferers. But most of the people with PTSD in America and around the world are women, from childhood sexual abuse, from sexual assault, from rape, from domestic violence, whole different things. But they don't get as much attention as the veterans. And when I started this, it was sort of for both of those communities, and in particular for the Vietnam vets. And I did not predict, but it's sort of this whole issue after the Iraq and Afghanistan wars, when there was way more people with PTSD. And now we understand that trauma is behind a lot of other illnesses, substance abuse, depression. And I think the rate of stress on individuals and on humans is increasing. We see that with the pandemic now. There's much more incidents of depression, anxiety, particularly among young people. So it's an emotionally challenging time. The other part about PTSD, which made it the choice, is that we need to try to make these things through the FDA and then have them covered by insurance. So we needed a very expensive, not just could lead to suicide, but when you live with such high stress that people would have with PTSD, it leads to a whole host of other physical problems and panic attacks and emergency room visits and things like that. So that
chronic pain.
Yeah. So
that's one thing I was going to ask you about as well. I've heard of a lot of people who've had relief, including myself, with chronic pain symptoms through MDMA therapy, because we know chronic pain is closely connected with fear. And I'm someone who's personally suffered from various kinds of chronic pain. And one symptom in particular, which I won't get into now, got way, way better. It basically went away after my second MDMA session in the span of a few months.
Wow. If you wouldn't mind sharing, because I think those are the kind of stories that people really learn from.
Yeah, I've been careful to talk about those experiences at the right time. I would say basically didn't go through any extreme childhood trauma. I would say no kind of physical abuse, or didn't see war or anything like that. But I guess I was bullied quite a bit and had kind of a chaotic, unstable home due to a lot of just interpersonal and familial issues. And that was kind of my source of trauma. And the more and more I learned through my therapeutic work with my great counselor of mine, the more I realized that childhood was very unsafe in many ways that I didn't realize at the time, but I was always, I guess, unconsciously like on alert for when the next big fight or the next conflict or the next segment of chaos would emerge and just hit me with surprise and assault me. And being on guard all the time for that kind of problem created a lot of fear and led to certain symptoms of chronic pain. And it's like that first MDMA experience, it was December of 2021. It's like suddenly the veil just got lifted, and I had no idea how I was impacted by certain childhood experiences. I was just kind of frozen from them. And I went into that experience with a very specific intention to work with a particular experience in the last few months that had occurred in my life, and I wanted to work on that. And I was like, that's my attention. And my therapist rightly said, like, set the attention, but then let it go. And I did that. And actually, none of the experience was about that particular thing, but it was all about, it took me all the way back to grade 4, 5, and 6. And I had no idea that was at all relevant or connected to what I was going through. And it did take a bit of work to connect the dots, which I'm still connecting, but I had no idea how much pain I actually went through as a child. And it made me really appreciate the difficult experiences and realize certain connections I had with my mom in particular. So sort of like her pains and her struggles were kind of my pain and my struggles. So I was able to access this sort of connection to my childhood that I just didn't have any conscious awareness of, which I think is a very important piece to highlight, is that we all go about our lives perceiving things through our conscious awareness, right? What we see, what we hear, what we feel, what we think. But there's a lot of things that we just can't tap into, or it would take a lot of psychotherapy and a lot of direction to tap into those areas. Seems like MDMA is a very powerful way to start accessing those deep, difficult emotions that we're kind of afraid and worried about accessing.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. I mean, that's quite a story. And I have worked with people within days of when they died. And these are people that have had cancer and were in incredible pain. And they were often medicated with opiates because they were in so much pain. But when you administer MDMA to people that are on opiates, they get synergistic pain control. It's actually better pain control than you get just with the opiates alone. But the opiates make people sleepy. They're extremely tiring for people. The more higher dose, you're almost like not even there. You're kind of very much tranquilized. But the stimulant properties of MDMA, combined with people that are on opiates, both have an additive pain reduction for many of the people and also wake them up, the stimulant properties, so that I've had several times where people have been within days of dying and they've been able to sort of come back out of this, opiate stupor and be more pain-free and more alert to say goodbye to their loved ones in a beautiful way. So I think that MDMA and pain is something that's very much needs a lot more research, and that MDMA also opens up the mind-body connection. So, we've talked about PTSD, but there is this incredible, Bessel van der Kolk has written the book, The Body Keeps the Score, and how trauma can be stored in the body. And when it's released, sometimes it's released in body pains and disconnected from a story. But as you can work with it and you instead of pushing the pain away or trying to reduce the symptoms, you open up to it. Sometimes a story will come with that. So, and I also think what you said was so important from what your therapist said, actually, that, do your best with the intentions and then throw them away. And then who knows what's going to come up. And for you, childhood stuff came up, but there's this inner wisdom. So the core part of our therapeutic method, we call it inner directed therapy. So let's say that we're your therapist. I don't know that you've, had these issues from childhood. You haven't even talked about it. You're talking about something else. But what we do is we support the patient wherever they're going and to express rather than suppress. That's the main thing. So if you have pains in your body, we encourage you to not run away from them, but to let them manifest and what's underneath them. If people feel sad, we encourage them to cry. If people want to scream, we encourage them to scream. But we believe in this inner healing intelligence. And we all know that our body, for all these, millions, billions of years, our body has this wisdom about healing itself. We get cuts, we get scratches, things return to the way they were. The body has this self-organizing mechanism to restore its function and this inner wisdom of the body. And we believe there's something similar in the mind, this inner healing intelligence. And so we didn't know, let's say, and you didn't know that it was going to go to your childhood. But the therapeutic approach would be to support you wherever you are going. You and your inner healing intelligence have this wisdom that's beyond our ability to really fully understand. So we support people in processing that. And then we also educate people that they are the source of the healing. You are healing yourself. The MDMA is helping you to do that. We are therapists are helping you to do that. But in the end, the work is being done by the patient, by you.
And there is kind of an argument that I hear sometimes by some people. We have fun debates on this where, I come from a traditional Indian background. So and if you know anything about Indian spirituality, it's very much focused on mysticism, meditation, yoga, all these things. And one thing that you hear when you talk to people about something like MDMA is that, you already have the inner intelligence within you. You already have the capabilities to heal yourself. So why do MDMA? Like if you're depressed or anxious or suffering from chronic anxiety, you can do things naturally, quote unquote, use various techniques without using a drug. And I have various issues with that argument. But what do you make of that? I guess more broadly as well, with someone who's going through therapy. Let's say they've been doing therapy for 6 months a year, and they're maybe getting a bit better or a lot better, but they're still really stuck, and they're wondering, like, do I just keep doing therapy or MDMA plus therapy? Like, what do you make of that comparison?
I think that there is. We don't use MDMA without therapy. So
of course,
it is therapy with MDMA. But I think the goal is that we're trying to help people learn how to do this on your own without the MDMA. So sometimes people would say, you've got this ability to do this, but people get stuck. That's the whole thing. Why do we put, you break your arm, you get it in a cast, you don't just say, you can heal it. We try to support the healing process. And so sometimes people get stuck and they can't go any further. But the difference would be we were to say, okay, all your healing should be done under MDMA. But that's not what we say. We say that we want you to learn how to do this under MDMA, and then you practice it during this integration process, during this period of neuroplasticity to act. And that's why I was talking before about that half-second lag before your normal patterns come in, where you can sink deeper and do deeper work. So the goal is to help people do this on their own, but the MDMA can be an aid in helping people learn how to do that. And so, again, our treatment, which is 42 hours of therapy, there's only 3 days that they get MDMA. And the goal is to make it so that they don't need it anymore. Some people will be fine with 2, few people with 1, some people may need 4, some people may need 5. But all of it is about helping people learn how to process difficult emotions and trauma on their own without the drug. That's the integration process. What do you bring back so that your baseline is changed? So I would say also that look what we're doing right now. We're using incredible technology to have this discussion. We're far, far away, and we could have, settled the time, for us to be in the same place at the same time, and that would have been, but then we probably would have used airplanes to get there. So It's okay to use things that facilitate what we're trying to do. We can't teach ourselves to fly. So it's not like the airplane is going to make it so one day I can just fly without it. But the psychedelic is designed, our therapeutic intervention, to help us do the emotional work that we need to do without that intervention. Because life is going to continue to traumatize us. Just read the newspaper. Just think about global warming. Just think about what's going on, the challenges that we face, so that people need to learn how to process trauma. So if somebody says, hey, you can do it your own, why bother doing the drug? What I would say is there's a bunch of people that are stuck and don't seem to have this ability to do it on their own. And so let us help them see what this new way is, help them where they can actually move through difficult emotion.
Yeah. And how do I want to get into that phase 3 study. I guess before, one broad comment I was just going to make is that it seems like from my own experience and from reading the literature that you don't want to boil things down and be too simplistic, but fear seems to be often one of the big causes for a lot of these psychological disorders. Fear, when you're afraid because of experiences you've had, and fear causes chronic pain, fear causes anxiety, fear can cause depression and PTSD. That's one frame to understand this. And people sometimes don't realize how afraid they are. And it seems like MDMA just really peels the layers of the onion to really investigate some of that fear. And I was also going to say that some of the people who are most traumatized often also have that chronic pain and also have anxiety attacks, panic attacks, have trouble sleeping, and they're always on edge. They haven't developed the sort of safety in their nervous system. And, one friend that I know in particular from Syria went through a lot of trauma, seen a lot of violent, traumatic things, and, is suffering greatly as a result of it. And fear seems to be one of the reasons why, is that because you went through this experience, you're conditioned to anticipate or expect some of those same things to occur, even if you move to a different environment, which can often be the case, either if one ages or moves out or goes to a different country and they're no longer surrounded with the same abuser or the same violence, but they're still conditioned with that fear. And so it seems like MDMA is really amazing at reducing fear.
Yeah, it is. And so we see that the amygdala, which is the fear processing part of the brain, when you have PTSD, you have a hyperactive amygdala. And you have lower activity in your frontal cortex. You're not thinking as logically. And then in the connection with the hippocampus, which is more for putting memories into long-term storage, there's less activity and less connectivity with the amygdala. So MDMA does the opposite. PTSD changes your brain. MDMA does the opposite in many ways. It reduces activity in the amygdala so that memories that are fearful, charged with fear or things, they don't have that same effect when you're under the influence of MDMA. It increases activity in the prefrontal cortex, so you think more logically. You can separate out things that may or may not be threats. You can have a little bit more time to analyze them, and it increases connectivity with the hippocampus, so you can take these traumas that seem like they're always happening, always about to happen. You're still seeing the world through this filter, that you're able now to place them in the past. Once you've no longer been defending against them, you can let these emotions wash over you. And then you can recognize, okay, I'm in a therapeutic situation. It's safe. This kind of thing happened long ago in my life. And then you can sort of move it into the past. So then when you move forward, you're in a much, much better place. So I think the fear reduction is important, but there's a bunch of the people in our studies have said, I don't know why they call this ecstasy. It's not like you take it and your problems go away. And there's a really good documentary about 3 of our Israeli patients called Trip of Compassion on Vimeo.
And I should watch that. Okay.
Yeah, Trip of Compassion. It's really good. But you'll see people shaking and just crying. And so the MDMA brings you into the trauma, but where you can express it. The fundamental difference is that beforehand, this trauma feels overwhelming. If you open to it, it'll never end. You'll never get out of it. You'll always be, but it's this inability to fully process it that keeps it around. And once you're able to fully process it, then it goes into the past. And so people do let out a lot of fearful emotions. So it's the wrong idea to think, oh, you take MDMA and fear is gone.
Yeah, I was just going to say, like, in my 2 experiences, like, ecstasy is not really the right word. Like there's kind of, I think I described it, there's the kind of canvas of feeling good. Your body feels good. You feel warm and fuzzy. It's very, very positive, but you're also this backdrop of intense positivity and self-love. Then you're kind of releasing deeply difficult things. It's very overwhelming. And, in both my experiences, I was biting my teeth quite a bit, biting my lips quite a bit. So I came out of it with very chapped lips. I had to put chapstick on it or whatever, but it's like, it's really positive and you feel good, but it's kind of a paradox. You feel good, but you also are letting out really difficult, really painful things that I feel like you probably, if you were to do that without the MDMA, and I feel like maybe your body wouldn't even let you. Like I've done normal therapy that's also been very powerful, but in therapy with my counselor without any substances, there has been sometimes moments of big release where I'm crying and crying. That often lasts sort of 15, 20 minutes. And even if I want to, like, oh, I got to release this one other thing, the body's just like, no, you can't do it. Whereas MDMA, you get a really expansive opportunity to release a lot of that trauma.
Yeah, that's a very, very good description of it. Exactly. Is that let's compare it to grief. Somebody that you love has died or something. And for many of us, it's hard to cry, but somebody has died. But then when you can start crying and you let out, it feels like you feel the pain even more, but you feel that you're working with it and it's going to come to an end. It's like, you're not going to be trapped in it forever. But it's the release of it. There's a certain joy in being able to release difficult emotions, even though they're difficult. So that's why this idea, I don't know why they call this ecstasy. It helps in the processing, but it could also be true for fear, that in this trip of compassion, you'll see people shaking in fear, but it was when they were traumatized, they had to sort of stay together psychologically to try to work their way out of these problems, or they froze, or just it was overwhelming. But you're able to release it. So what we've been able to demonstrate, and maybe now is a good time to switch to some of the results.
So the phase 3 study, for people who don't know, I might even pull it up here in a sec, but it's a phase 3 published in Nature, I think September 14th. And it's the protocol you described already for PTSD. And you can talk about whatever you want to talk about there. But the results were 66% complete remission among patients in the MDMA arm. Is that right?
Well, there's different ways. So the first study was actually, let me say this. The paper that we just published, it was 72% no longer qualified for a diagnosis of PTSD.
Oh, really? I thought I read 66. Maybe I read an older one.
Well, that's the first one that we published in May 2021. Okay, gotcha. So let me just say very, very briefly that, so it's been 37 and a half years. It's been a long, long struggle since I started MAPS.
Yeah.
And even longer since I decided to focus my life on psychedelics. So that's been over 50 years. But from 1986, when I started MAPS, to 1992, we had 5 protocols all rejected, some from Harvard Medical School, UC San Francisco, other academic institutions, all rejected by the FDA. Starting in 1992, we got permission for the first phase 1 dose response safety study. And that was a major breakthrough. The FDA had major meetings, and they decided to reopen the door after multiple decades of suppression to psychedelic research. They started actually in 1990 with the first protocol to Rick Strassman for DMT. But that was kind of negatively loaded. He was thinking, maybe DMT is the only endogenous psychedelic in your brain. Maybe too much of it causes schizophrenia. So it's kind of negatively loaded. But so then we got permission to do 1992, this formal FDA advisory committee meeting, opened the door to psychedelic research. That took us through the 90s. So starting around 2000, we started working with PTSD patients. So that took 14 years just from the start of MDMA to really start doing it. And we started a study in Spain. And that was heartbreaking. Marcela actually went to Spain because she grew up in Colombia. She was one of the therapists by that point. And the study was going early, dose response, got up to the 50 milligram dose group. And then there was some media about it. And then the Madrid Anti-Drug Authority shut the study down. Heartbreaking. But then 2004, we were able to start the first study in the US. So from 2004 to 2016, we did all these phase 2 studies. And that's to figure out what's the dose, what's the patient population, who does it work in, what's inclusion exclusion criteria, what is our treatment method, is it 1, is it 2, is it 3 sessions, how many integration. So we did all these things and figured out how we wanted to do, quote, the phase 3 studies, which are the large-scale studies that you need to do, randomized, placebo-controlled, double-blind studies to try to prove safety and efficacy. And November 29, 2016, we got permission to go to phase 3. 2017, most of that we negotiated with the FDA about all the aspects of what phase 3 would include, what's the design, what are our statistical analysis methods, all this other things. We worked on that. And then in 2018, we started the first phase 3 study. And so we published that in the results in May 2021. And that study was the one that had 67% of the people that received MDMA no longer qualified for a diagnosis of PTSD. at the 2-month follow-up, 2 months after the last
Sorry, what was the percentage? You just cut out there. What was the percentage?
That was 67%.
Yeah, okay. Yeah.
All right. Now, the placebo group, the group that got therapy without MDMA, they also benefited, and it was around 32% of the people that had PTSD, an average of 14 years. This is severe PTSD.
Yeah.
1/3 of them had PTSD over 20 years. Roughly 1/3 had positive behavior, which means that they either attempted to kill themselves or positive behavior means you go to a bridge and you think about jumping off, or you go to a hardware store, you buy some rope, but you don't actually use it. So these were the most difficult, severe PTSD, chronic PTSD. And in a testimony, actually, I think to the skill of the therapist and to the therapeutic approach, roughly 32%, even without the MDMA, were able to get over these long-standing patterns of PTSD, but 67% with MDMA. And then there's another measure which is called clinically significant reductions of PTSD. It's a certain number on the scale, the CAPS, the clinician-administered PTSD scale. But what it means is that your symptoms have gone down enough so that it's clinically significant, even though you still may have a diagnosis of PTSD. So that was another 21%. So we had basically 88% responders and 12% non-responders in the group that got therapy with MDMA. And when we talk about safety, there was a bunch of treatment emergent adverse events, like we didn't have bladder problems in this, but there would be muscle tightness, there would be sweating, there would be loss of hunger, there would be eye wiggling, different kind of things that happen on an acute basis, but then would be gone by the next day. And then we did have 2 women. One tried to kill herself twice during the study, and another woman had such severe suicidal ideation that came up during the therapy that she checked herself into a hospital not to kill herself. And both of these women were in the placebo group. Yeah. They got the therapy without the MDMA. So we didn't have anybody try to hurt themselves during the MDMA group.
I remember when I first heard that. I think you said that on Joe Rogan's podcast and Lex Friedman's podcast. I was like, oh no, and you're like, oh, placebo arm. I was like, oh wow, okay. Damn.
Yeah, it just shows the background of having PTSD is really difficult for people. And when you do therapy, here's another interesting point, is that the VA last year published a study. It took them about 6 years to do this study. And it was in 914 veterans. And they were comparing the 2 main therapies used inside the VA for PTSD. One is called prolonged exposure, and the other is called cognitive processing therapy. And what they showed is that in the prolonged exposure, around 56% of the people dropped out of the study because it was too re-traumatizing for them. It was too difficult for them.
This was just psychotherapy?
This was just psychotherapy without medications.
Yeah, okay. Gotcha.
And the prolonged exposure was somewhere in the neighborhood of 46% dropped out. I mean, excuse me, that was the cognitive processing therapy. Roughly 46% dropped out. The therapy itself is difficult for people that have PTSD. So that helps explain a bit about what happened to those 2 women in the placebo. Then what we showed is it was highly statistically significant, 0.0001, 1 in 10,000 chance that it was random, which is astonishing. And then also in terms of effect size, an effect size of 1 is 1 standard deviation from the norm. And so this was 2.1 within group, the people who got therapy plus MDMA. When you subtract the placebo subtracted, it's 0.9, meaning it's almost 1 standard deviation, but that's subtracting the therapy from the drug. And in practice, it's going to be therapy plus the drug. So at the end of the year, the journal Science comes up with a list of the top 10 scientific breakthroughs in the year. And in 2021, well, in 2021,
okay.
They look backwards. So at the end in December, and they said that our paper in May 2021, the first phase 3 study, was one of the top 10 scientific breakthroughs of the world.
Yeah.
It was tremendous. Wow. We really, really were shocked that they said that. And we realized it's not just for us. It's that our study worked great, but that it's the harbinger of the leading edge of all this new area of psychedelic assisted therapy. So in a way, they were awarding this to us, but also to the people doing psilocybin research and on and on. So that was really, so the results were so good, actually, that we met this criteria for applying to the FDA for getting approval on the basis of only one phase 3 study instead of 2. And the FDA said no. They said, we're more concerned about the safety. We would like you to do the second phase 3 study. And we had earlier thought that we would have to do 2. And so we did go forward and we completed it. And September 14th is when we published in Nature Medicine the results of the second phase 3 study. And so that was where we switched it from just severe PTSD to moderate to severe PTSD. And we did that so that once it's approved, it wouldn't be just approved for the hardest cases. Moderate PTSD is still disabling in multiple different ways. It's still difficult for people. Very, very difficult. And around somewhere in the neighborhood of 2/3 to 3/4 of the people in the second phase 3 study still were severe, and the rest were moderate. So most of them were still severe. And what we showed in the second phase 3 study is that roughly 49% of the people who got therapy without MDMA no longer had PTSD at the 2-month follow-up. Much better than the 32% in the first phase 3 study. And we think there's
that's a high percentage for 2 months.
Well, this is the 3.5 months therapy, the 3 experimental sessions, the 42 hours of therapy, and that's 2 months after the last experimental session. So the reason is we didn't want
total of how many months? Total of how many months then?
About the whole thing there would be about 5.5 months. But after
and then 2 months after that, you're doing the follow-up?
Well, no, the treatment is 3.5 months.
Oh, yeah. Okay. Gotcha.
3 MDMA sessions roughly 1 month apart, and then these 12 90 minutes. So there's, after the last experimental session, there's 3 weekly integrative sessions, and then we're done. And then we wait until 2 months after the last experimental session, because we didn't want people to say, oh, they're in a psychedelic afterglow, or this is impacting their results are just temporary.
Exactly.
So at the 2-month follow-up, it was long enough to start talking about durability and to be away from the afterglow of the psychedelic experience. And so I think that the therapists that worked on the second phase 3 study, most of them had worked on the first phase 3 study. And so I think what we're seeing is that from the therapist perspective, they're learning how to work with MDMA. They're getting more experienced. And they're also learning how to be therapists even without MDMA in a more effective way. They're less directive. They're supporting patients more. They're not as nervous about deep and profound emotions. They don't need to suppress the symptoms. They've learned. So I think that it's both this moderate to severe instead of severe, and also the learning of the therapists, their skill increasing. That's where we had about 49% of the people in the control group that no longer had PTSD at the 2-month follow-up.
Yeah.
But
and that group, by the way, you're giving them a placebo. So like it's the same setup as the MDMA session, but you're giving them something that won't. So they're just for 8 hours. I just imagine that would be hard to just do regular therapy, right? I assume it's maybe less without MDMA.
Well, no, it still has to be the same time. So we have to keep all the variables the same.
Oh.
The only variable that's different is MDMA or no MDMA.
Yeah, but that person's probably not doing therapy for 8 hours. That would
they often are, and that's why. Keep in mind now that they're listening to music. They've got headphones on. That they've got this terrible traumas that they're trying to work through. But it's different. Like if you go to a therapy for an hour, it takes a while to settle in. You start talking your issues. You can kind of go deep for a while, and then you're like, oh. Now it's time to wrap up. Now I have to get ready to go out into the world again.
Yeah.
So with an 8-hour session, it's much more relaxed. It's done during the day, so people are not sleepy. and they're able to find their way to the issues that they're concerned about, sometimes issues that they didn't even know about, but it's because they're able to determine their own trajectory. There's no pressure from the point of the therapist, go right now to the trauma, which can be re-traumatizing, as we said in this VA study, so that it's surprisingly easy for people to have a day-long session, even if they don't get the MDMA, because their emotions are so much at the surface. They're so painful that they want to work with them in a way, if they can, and if they're supported. And so actually what we showed again was 72% now that got the MDMA that no longer had a diagnosis of PTSD.
Yeah, that's incredible. Like hats off to you and your team for getting a result like that.
Yeah, that's these are incredible with people that have long-term chronic PTSD. So the FDA labeled this a breakthrough therapy. And what we are currently anticipating is in December, we hope to submit all the application to the FDA. And so then
next
there's
month?
a 6-month time clock.
So next month you're going to be submitting?
Yeah, all of the data that we've been gathering for all these years since 2000, since 1992, actually, all the stuff. And we've summarized all the world's literature on MDMA. There's over 5,000 papers on MDMA. So it's called the Investigator's Brochure. So if people want to go to the MAPS website and download the Investigator's Brochure, it's in I think it's the 13th or 14th edition. But it's the summary of the world's literature from MDMA from a risk-benefit perspective. Also, the treatment manual is on our website where people can learn what is our therapeutic approach. And what I think people will be able to see is that we're trying to be transparent about what we're doing. And we think that within this 6-month time clock, when the FDA asks us questions, then the clock stops. And we've got over 100 people that will be then working to answer whatever FDA questions have. And we think that we've already done a lot of negotiation with FDA, so there shouldn't be new unexpected questions. They've already done, Health Canada and MAPS has done, and FDA has done a big audit of our data, a bunch of our data, and that went well. So we're hoping, somewhere around June or so, that there's a good chance that FDA may approve MDMA-assisted therapy for PTSD. If that happens, then the Drug Enforcement Administration, the DEA, has to reschedule. And so there's the FDA Controlled Substances staff. They work to recommend a schedule, and then DEA has its own team, and they have 90 days to do that. So we're hoping for Schedule 3. That's what we're going to be proposing. We'll see. The DEA must move it out of Schedule 1 to make it a prescription drug. Whether it's 2, 3, Schedule 4, is up for this negotiation. Now, once the DEA reschedules it, because this is a controlled substance and because of our system of government, the states have to reschedule too. And roughly half the states automatically reschedule, and the other states have a variety of different mechanisms by which they do that. The Board of Pharmacy has to have a meeting or different things. So in California, there had to be a whole new law passed. And the same was true in Colorado and New York. So we've now, ahead of time, passed laws in these 3 states that now make them automatic rescheduling as well. So we hope by the end of 2024 that this may be on the market, that people with PTSD might be able to be prescribed MDMA-assisted therapy, and we very much hope and expect that it will be covered by insurance as well. That's the other big challenge. And so we're near the end of this 37.5-year period of data gathering, and then we will move into this final analysis by the FDA. If that works, our phase 3 was done with data from Israel, US, and Canada. And the Ministry of Health in Israel and Health Canada are looking to the FDA. We have the most highly respected regulatory agency in the world, but other people want FDA to go first. If FDA go first, we think shortly after, Health Canada, Ministry of Health in Israel. Then we want to move to Europe. And what MAPS, the nonprofit, is doing is going to be doing a lot of humanitarian projects. So I just came back from Iceland, and we were educating therapists from 10 different countries on how to work with MDMA. And there was a group from Denmark, and they have refugees, loads of Syrian refugees in Denmark. And what happens in Denmark is that they actually made them citizens. And now they're citizens of Denmark. They're covered by Danish healthcare. And so there was a group there that was with us in Iceland that wants to do study in second-generation Syrian refugees, where the younger people speak the language, speak Danish. A lot of the older people didn't learn the language. And the younger people are a little bit less religious in some ways than the older people, so they're generally more open. And they've also come to realize that they're not going back to Syria. So there is this project to work with refugees in Denmark. We're just at the early stages of starting up. MAPS wants to take MDMA-assisted therapy to where there is lots of trauma, but not necessarily any money. So it's part of the global humanitarian projects.
Yeah,
so that's what we're working on.
I want to be careful about time here. Do you have a hard out at 6:30, or is it possible to go to 7? Because I wanted to ask you. I want to get your thoughts on this one.
I pretty much. I could go maybe 5 or 10 minutes longer, but I do have something else. So
okay,
yeah, let's switch.
No worries. We might have to do a part 2 another time if you're able to do that.
Oh, right. That would be great. Yeah.
Yeah, just because. Yeah, I wanted to get your thoughts. Let me move to that then. Well, okay. Let me first ask, I guess, from that phase 3 study, given these astounding results you had from moderate to severe PTSD, it's kind of an open-ended question, but I'd love for you to expand more on this. Like what are people experiencing? What's kind of, are there a handful of experiences that you remember or that you heard about in these trials? Like what kind of realizations are people having that lead to a rate as high as 72% no longer qualify with PTSD?
Yeah. Okay, so I'm going to give you a very non-representative story initially from someone from phase 2. And this, again, is not representative. But what happened was...
Is this the one that he had one experience and didn't want to do more?
Yeah.
Okay. I've already heard that one.
Okay. All right. So we'll skip
Is there another one?
Yes.
Well, can you mention any ones from phase 3 where you found this?
Yeah. There are... a lot of times it's not so much... insights, because you can get insights in your traditional psychotherapy, but it can be overly cognitive. So what's really more powerful in a way is the emotional release that people have.
Right. I often talk about this with people from my own experience. It's like you can theoretically or cognitively tell yourself or tell people like, yeah, I love myself. Like I like the way I am. But that's kind of one theme that comes up when you do these things is many people realize that they're such a harsh critic of themselves and they need more self-compassion. But, before an experience like that, you might be like, yeah, of course, I like myself. I'm fine with myself. I'm not that harsh. But then afterwards, like you really start loving yourself and feel this wave of self-compassion that you didn't have before, because before it was just an idea or a concept, whereas now it's actually a felt, embodied feeling.
I think that's the key right there, is it moves from, back in the 50s, 60s, or earlier, you hear about people that go through Freudian psychoanalysis and they meet with their analyst, 4 times a week or something for years and years. And they still have the same issues. They have a better understanding, but the process doesn't really help. So, some of the people that were in phase 3 that were, it's hard to describe, not insights, but just emotional release. People will see, this was again phase 2, but the trip of compassion will give you a good sense of what the emotional release looks like and how that happens.
Yeah. Yeah, I guess I'm just very curious about this trajectory where the 3 sessions, what that's like, the therapy before and the sessions, and how you get from severe PTSD, intense flashbacks, chronic pain, inability to sleep, like all these things to, in your protocol, 5 or 6 months later, it's 72% don't qualify. I'm just very interested in this sort of hero's journey, like what happens in those, because that's a very short time period too. Like I know many people with PTSD, years and years and years, some therapy, some not, some like religious, some like they're like spans all across different backgrounds, and they're struggling for years and years, yet your protocols produce such amazing results within a few months.
Yeah. Well, to give you a sense then, that often this first session is one where people understand now that they can release these emotions and these memories, that they're in this different kind of emotional set where they're not overwhelmed. But often what we see is that once they do a lot of the first sessions give people hope. I don't know if you've heard this story about, there was a woman who was volunteering, and she was saying that this was her last hope, and that if it didn't work, she was going to go to Nepal and commit suicide. And I don't know why Nepal, but this is the story I heard from the therapist, that she was going to go to Nepal and commit suicide if this MDMA therapy didn't work. So in her first session, after about an hour and a half or so, the MDMA is just starting to have an effect. And she turns to the therapist and she says, I don't think I'm going to have to go to Nepal anymore. Now, this is before she did a lot of the therapy work. This was before her second and third sessions. But something about the MDMA, the way in which she was able to approach these emotions and these memories in a different, more productive way, gave her hope that this therapy would be helpful to her, and that there was an alternative to this frozen situation where she felt if it doesn't get better, she's going to commit suicide.
Yeah.
So
I can also attest that as well, by the way. I'm not going to go into it all now, but that first experience you've been fighting for such a long time, things don't make sense, you don't know why you're suffering, or you might do, but you're still stuck and you're frozen. And something about that first experience gives you this dose of hope, literally and metaphorically, where you're like, oh, I can get better. I can see some light ahead, whereas I just saw darkness before.
Wow. Well, yeah, if we do this again, maybe then you could share more about how that worked for you.
Yeah, we'll definitely have to do a part 2. But okay,
let me add this other thing though. So that people often say now, once they've had this first session, we find that people often go deeper in the second session because they've learned they've learned what the drug does. They've learned how to maneuver with it. They've learned that they can trust the therapist, and that they're able to go down much deeper. And then the third session, some people feel that maybe they don't even need the third session. But the thing about it is knowing that there's a third session means you can go much deeper in the second session. Because if you feel like I'm opening up this can of worms, and this has been really traumatic, and I've suppressed it for a really long time, and I don't know if I can work all the way through it in the second session, but I'll give it a try. And then a lot of times they're able to do that. But just knowing that if they have a need for a third session, it's there, that gives them the sort of confidence to go even deeper during the second session. And so some people still have, particularly the people that are high on the dissociative subtype. So we haven't really talked about that. But people are dissociated. One of the most common strategies when you're traumatized is to dissociate, like you're not really there. It's happening to somebody else. But when that happens, when you do this dissociation, then it's harder to heal because you're dissociated from everything. And then when you kind of move back into your emotions, it feels like it's more overwhelming. And so the dissociative subtype people tend to be the hardest to treat. And we do enroll a bunch of people in the dissociative subtype. And what we showed is that those people actually did better on average than everybody else because they were so hungry for kind of being able to process this, that once they could do that, then they can make more dramatic progress. So I think there is often a trajectory for a lot of progress. The first one is, we often call it the archaeology of trauma, that you go layer upon layer upon layer, like you described this fourth and fifth grade, this trauma that happens there. Yeah. So you get a kind of sense of the landscape and the depth of things. And then in the second sessions and third sessions, you can go a lot deeper.
Yeah. I've noticed a bit of a time evolution as well. Like I said, the first session, very much going back a few years. Second session was more relating to current reality, but still that second session, didn't exactly deal with now, but more current than the other one. So there's a bit there's this kind of evolution of issues that you're working through. I'm going to do my next one, by the way, probably in February. It's been 2 years since I did my last. It was December 2021, February 2022, and then now it's been a while. It's just life has been crazy. I guess I've been more productive, been more free of various issues. And so it's allowed me to live better. And now I feel like it's time to do the deep dive, because you kind of get in a place of feeling a little stuck and you're like, okay, now time to go back in.
Well, I think you're saying something that's super important, which is that for each individual,
I do have two more questions. I do have two more questions. Keep in mind. So,
okay. Well, let's go to 640. We can go to 640, okay, and then I'll have to stop. Okay. But I just want to say that you just pointed to something very, very important, which is that each individual, you've been integrating what's happened. And so the fact that it can take a year and a half or so to integrate till you feel ready for the next one, that's the real sense. So in research, we have to do this in a short way, once a month for 3 months, more or less, because we don't want this to take forever. And often that's fine. But for you, what you're describing is that you had one session, you waited about 3-4 months for the second, and now it'll be, more than a year and a half or so, something like that.
Yeah, which is 2 years.
2 years. Yeah. Okay. So this post-approval, this will be customized to each individual. It's not going to be once a month for 3 months. And I think you're pointing to, just for you, it's really, you haven't needed it because you've been putting into practice what you've learned from the first 2 sessions. And now, after a while, you're ready for another one. That's a really great example for people.
Yeah. I think maybe we'll do my part 2 in late February if you're around then, instead of after my
that would one. Yeah, let's do it after. That sounds great.
That might be interesting. Okay, 2 things. We'll see if we can hit them in time here. I want to get to Roland Griffiths is going to be the second one. First one, I spoke to the scientist who you probably haven't heard of, but he's big in the COVID space, done great research on the COVID vaccines. But recently I spoke to him and he told me something, and we just did like an emergency podcast a few days ago, yet to be released, on experiences he had in the research realm in his undergraduate studies. And he was doing MDMA research on rats, and was part of 2 studies, his first 2 studies doing research MDMA on rats, funded by the NIDA, National Institute of Drug Abuse. And long story short, that first study, they're giving rats an insane amount of MDMA and heating them up. So they're kind of looking for the negative outcome, is how he described it. But in the study, I think it was like comparing adolescent rats versus adult rats and finding neurotoxicity. And they had found that with the adult rats for sure. But for the adolescents, I believe there was far less neurotoxicity. And in fact, with some of the adolescent rats, I think it was, you give them MDMA the first time, and then when they're adults, you give MDMA again. And there's some kind of neuroprotection mechanism where when they're adults, there's less of a neurotoxicity when they're at that time than if you had just given them MDMA when they were adults without the first dose. And he tells in his study how he felt certain very explicit pressures to emphasize certain findings over other ones because there was a very clear incentive to establish and to cement these negative findings with MDMA and not do anything sort of positive or less than negative. And there's another study too where it was MDMA versus citalopram, antidepressant, and let me see if I can remember all of what he said. It was very complicated, but basically they ended up finding neurotoxicity with citalopram, which they didn't expect, but they found it with the MDMA. And he was, when doing this research, he was interested in covering that as well, but the clear directive was no, don't do that. That's not, no, this is a pharma drug, but do it for MDMA. What do you make of this? Is 2005, 2009 in that range? What is your view on something like that? I'd love to hear what you think.
Well, unfortunately, the National Institute on Drug Abuse has become, or was at that time, much more of an ally of the Drug Enforcement Administration. They were bought and paid for by Prohibition, and they were looking for negative outcomes, and they would twist. So let me give you the worst example. We had to do a lot of studies about neurotoxicity, lots and lots of research. And actually, we bought the first primates for the researchers, George Riccardi, that was funded by NIDA. And then we did humans. I got a spinal tap. I've got two spinal taps.
By the way, one quick thing. He also, this researcher, Dr. Joseph Freeman, he told me about a primate study where they accidentally mixed up the MDMA vial with the methamphetamine.
That's where I'm getting to. Yes. Okay.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay. So, but this is just to say how this research is thought of and aimed. So, we did these primate studies, no problems with dopamine, and it was 2.5 milligrams per kilogram, somewhere between 2.5 milligrams per kilogram and 5 milligrams per kilogram was the no effect level in primates for serotonin neurotoxicity, above what humans take, but no effect on dopamine, and none of the animals died. But through the 80s and 90s, this idea of serotonergic neurotoxicity, which had been used to criminalize MDMA, used to block research, people weren't showing all these problems. It was supposedly, as you get older, these problems will manifest. It didn't happen. So the National Institute on Drug Abuse was really getting nervous about, now we're getting ready to maybe do therapy studies with MDMA. And they were like, information about drugs to try to keep them illegal, to scare people. A lot of stuff I would not say was the best science. So what happened then was that these same researchers got kind of nervous about serotonin. And so they did a bunch of studies now in primates, and they published in Science this article that claimed that MDMA hurt dopamine and could cause Parkinson's. And we as a MAPS got a preprint, and it was a single oral dose of MDMA can produce dopaminergic neurotoxicity. Well, it wasn't a single oral dose. It was a sequence of doses. They would give one dose at a time, but they would give it like 6 times. And then they killed a bunch of the primates, died from overdoses. But then the editor of Science, the publisher of Science, Alan Leshner, put out a press release saying that MDMA is like taking MDMA is like playing Russian roulette with your brain. Kind of scary. So it didn't make sense to us, because in the spinal tap studies that we did, there was no effect on dopamine. In the primate studies we'd done, no effect on dopamine. Now they're saying, they don't really see, the serotonin, but now, dopamine's a big problem. Well, we challenged them, and they didn't give it the way people normally take it in oral ways. And for a year, they kept defending this study. And then eventually they withdrew it. They published a retraction, and they said they had mixed up the bottles. Yeah. And somehow they'd given methamphetamine instead of MDMA to these primates.
That's crazy.
But again, the point I'm trying to make about it is that the National Institute on Drug Abuse, which funded this study, should never have published this study in Science, because first off, why were these animals dying from overdoses? Keep in mind that methamphetamine is a lot stronger than MDMA. Yeah. So they're giving the wrong drug, but they're giving it in MDMA amounts. So there was a lot of things that should have alerted them to this research that, that caused them to question. And then it was one of the most embarrassing things ever, and it was disastrous. So I think this concept of...
I also want you to address the rat studies as well, if you can.
Well, it's just like the whole thing about neurotoxicity is this idea now that we talk about neuroplasticity. It's from neurotoxicity. It's the same phenomenon. It's all about functional consequences. What are the functional consequences? And so as far as, quote, neurotoxicity, we don't see any functional consequences in our studies. We did. So I think that there's been, I talked earlier at the very beginning about how we do political science, but that's science to try to help people understand. The National Institute on Drug Abuse has often done political science, but to aid the policy of prohibition, and they've not been as much. So for them to not to want to say, oh, there's something similar going on here with the prescription drug that's going on supposedly with MDMA.
I've lost you again. Okay, you're back. Oh. Sorry, they've not. Oh, sorry, they've not what?
Well, you know, for the National Institute of Drug Abuse to not want to do a study with prescription drugs, showing they do similar things to MDMA in terms of this, quote, neurotoxicity. Right. That's just, again, it's not good science. It's not reliable science.
Yeah, it's particularly, I was talking about, so this researcher attesting to the fact that he felt pressure to not, to highlight the negative findings with MDMA, but not for the other citalopram in the study. And does this make sense to you? Is this in line kind of like the NIDA, like I guess they're funding these research in rats in 2005, 2009, and with, I guess, a very explicit mission to find negative effects, which then I guess they would use the basis for recommending against or fear mongering to the public.
Yes, exactly. I mean, there's a lot more we can say about the twisted science at NIDA. Hopefully, it's better, but that remains to be seen.
Yeah, have you heard of similar things though, like what that researcher told me? Pressures to highlight some things with MDMA. You can't say anything positive about MDMA.
Yeah. Actually, if you want to see research that's published by NIDA, that's funded by NIDA, they keep using the word hallucinogen. They don't use the word psychedelic. You have to kind of use this negative word hallucinogen. So we would be better off if the National Institute on Drug Abuse was really committed to good science and to reporting whatever the results they get, rather than, we need to justify criminal prohibition and mass incarceration.
And that's the heart of the problem. You think? I've been trying to make sense of what this researcher told me is that they had a political mission to criminalize these drugs, like that certain political entrenchments, and that led them to pressurize this kind of research.
Yeah. I mean, it's pretty cruel throwing people in jail for things, and you have to sort of scare the public about why is this something that we need to do. It's terrible brain damage, and we're getting a whole generation of brain damaged people, and to say that prescription drugs do the same thing, neither of which means that people are fundamentally brain damaged. It's again. Well, anyway, it's critically important for us as researchers to be fully transparent as much as we can about the risks as well as the benefits. And I wish that the National Institute on Drug Abuse would be the same.
Yeah, and last point on this, we're learning more and more about things like SSRIs. A lot of the theories that got them approved and promoted have turned out to be flawed or totally debunked in many ways, like the whole serotonin imbalance theory. And we're learning more and more things. I'm hearing about sexual dysfunction related to SSRIs, many side effects that were underreported, and many young people, a lot of young girls are on SSRIs, and they're experiencing certain negative symptoms. And it's like, why did one drug get fast-tracked, accelerated, and promoted by everyone, but other drugs like MDMA, psilocybin are just illegal? That doesn't make sense.
Yeah, it's not rational at all. The drug war has never been rational. It's never been really about drug abuse, reducing drug abuse. It's been about persecution of minorities.
Okay, lastly, you got to go Roland Griffiths. If there's any few words you want to say about his legacy, about what it means to you, him passing away and what he's done.
I think that, Roland led the psilocybin research at Johns Hopkins, influenced by Bob Jesse to get involved. And Roland's made massive contributions to the field. But one of the things that I said, so we had the Psychedelic Science 2023, the world's largest conference on psychedelics ever, 12,400 people. We had just over 300 speakers. We had a dinner for Roland to honor him. This was at the Colorado Convention Center. We had over 1,800 people at the dinner. It was the largest dinner in the history of the Colorado Convention Center. There was just an enormous number of people at this one dinner. And we had all sorts of people that had been his postdocs and students that he's mentored and scientists he's worked with. It was just beautiful. But one of the things that I said at that dinner that I'll say now about Roland is that I think from a political point of view, from a global consciousness change point of view, the most important study with psychedelics was one that will be published, I think, in the next month or two, that Roland helped start. And it was a study with religious leaders. It was done by Tony Bossis also at NYU. So it was done with Tony and Roland at NYU and Hopkins. And they took people from different religions who were ministers who had never done psychedelics before, and they would get a psilocybin experience. And what they're finding is that these people from the different religions still felt that this was a genuine religious experience for most of them, and that it deepened their understanding of spirituality. It deepened their practice of being a minister or a rabbi or an imam or whatever. And that what this could lead to, and Roland was very cautious and very conservative, so he doesn't say anything about this in this particular paper. But there may be subsequent papers done with qualitative interviews of the various people. So the question is there a common mystical core underlying all the different spiritual religions, the religions that we have? And if so, do we think of religion like languages? People don't say English is better than Spanish is better than German. They have different flavors. They're different cultural, historical developments, but they all come from the way of we want to use our vocal cords in order to try to communicate things to people. And there's all these different languages. So I think that why the study that Roland was doing, I think has politically the most important of all the psychedelic research, because it points to a possible understanding that can underscore a move towards peace. That if we understand that we're all connected and that the religions are different attempts to do more or less a similar thing, that then we can stop killing people for their different religious beliefs and we can try to start cooperating. And so I look forward very much to that. And so what Roland also did right before he died is he raised a bunch of $1 million. I think it was maybe 12 to 20 million, something like that, for a research center at Hopkins that would look not just at psilocybin for clinical conditions, but psilocybin for normally sort of healthy people to deepen their spirituality, deepen their views, their emotions, deepen their sense of love and connection. So I think Roland's done great work for which we owe him a great debt of gratitude.
Yeah, and personally for you, knowing him, and I guess lastly on his sort of his approach to death, he was very sort of courageous and brave about it. And he said he was curious to learn what would happen when he dies. I remember him saying stuff like that. What do you make of that? Did you have any interactions with him before death?
Yeah. So Roland said he was curious to learn more about death. Yeah. And so, he approached death in a courageous way. Very wonderful.
Yeah. Did you interact with him a lot before death?
Oh, a lot. Yeah. I mean, we did. I mean, he was initially uncomfortable. So as I said, MAPS is about drug development and also about drug policy reform. And Roland was a little bit nervous about just do the drug development, stick away from drug policy reform. The more you talk about how bad NIDA can be, or he was funded by NIDA for a lot of things earlier in his career. But he was a little bit more reluctant to engage both in drug policy reform because he was worried that might stop the research. And I felt that would actually help the research. The more that we can challenge the drug work, because a lot of the research was blocked because, and the way NIDA did this too, is you develop good, these things, medical marijuana. Oh, that used to be a totally demonized drug. It was all horrible. So then you start questioning, why are these things illegal? So, we had our little disagreements about that, but mostly it's just a great sense of gratitude for the contributions that he made and the legacy that he's left us.
Yeah. Anything that he said that was particularly touching in the days or weeks before he passed away, or something that you remember? Interactions?
Well, he said this may sound a bit self-serving, but he did say that he thought a lot of the drug policy work that I was doing was actually worthwhile.
Yeah, well, rest in peace. Rest in peace for him.
Yes.
Were you personally kind of grieving or sort of in some state of sadness?
Yeah. I mean,
or were you feeling more gratitude?
I was so hoping that his religious leader study would get published when he was still alive. That's, I think, a big sadness that didn't happen. But it's going to come out.
Yeah, it's also sad. He and I got into great touch. Like, we were very close a few months before. I was helping him with certain media opportunities, and I was trying to get him on Joe Rogan's podcast, which he really wanted to do. I think he was maybe waiting for the religious professionals. And then I, from what I understand, the weeks before he passed away, he was in a state where he couldn't really talk that well. It was difficult. Yeah. So he couldn't do Joe Rogan's podcast, which is really sad. And then there was talks for him to do Jordan Peterson's podcast again, which the first time he did was incredible. And that also got, that was also a missed opportunity. So that was unfortunate, but
well, he did so much, and he has set the groundwork for so much more to come that, you know, he contributed more than his share, and I'm sure he died in peace.
Well, hopefully he's in a better place, and he's, well, who knows what happens, but I wonder. Obviously, it's made me think too a lot of where he's at right now, and if he's experiencing as himself, or how that happens. Do you lose your individual identity or not? I have no idea.
Well, I think you do, but you know, who knows?
Yeah. All right, Rick, thank you so much. This has been an illuminating couple of hours. Really enjoyed talking to you and sharing some of my own experiences and hearing about your own journey. I wanted to ask you about your experiences, but I guess we'll table that for next time.
Okay. And then best wishes for your upcoming experience.
Yes. Yeah. Thank you. Again, thank you so much for coming on. And I think my audience is going to really appreciate this.
Has the dust settled from the COVID policy response? Far from it. The storms are many: inflation, learning losses, ill health, high crime, broken government services, displaced workers, substance abuse, mass loneliness, discredited science, real estate crisis, censorship, and overweening state power. The world is on fire with war, mass killings, crime, hunger, revolution. The lack of accountability, or even so much as an apology, is a foreshadowing. They'll keep their newfound powers and try it all again. Brownstone Institute is seeking answers, undertaking important research and publishing the results while providing fellowships for dissident scholars who have been professionally displaced. It's not about this one crisis. We urgently need to restore peace, prosperity, and integrity in science and journalism. Visit brownstone.org for more. We may never get to the truth, but we can get closer to the truth. There will be no stopping the efforts.